Alright, so we continue this task of setting up the game logic, and what we want to do in the next step is to communicate the result of one player's selection to the other. So here we've got the coordinates, and what we want to do, we want to inform the second player that the first player has chosen these coordinates. What do you think? Is it a hit or a miss? So the way to do it is to assume that the player class has a method which works the opposite of shooting. So shooting is making a selection, selecting coordinates, and probably let's call the other method receiving is taking these coordinates as a parameter and returning whether these coordinates are a hit or a miss. So let's go to the class player here and create the stub for this method. I'm going to call it receive. Or receive shot, or simply receive. And this method will take two parameters, y and x, or x and y, or row and column. And it should return a char, since we're representing the cell as a char, of whether it's a hit or a miss. So what's the idea here? The idea is to check whether that cell is a ship or not, right? In my own board, in own board. So if on board, the check cell, call it RNC, all the way RNC is ship, then we're going to return board dot hit. Otherwise, we can return board dot miss. Now, once we do this, this information can be communicated back to the other player. So basically what we want to do here, we want to say result maybe 1 is the player 2 receiving the rows and columns here. So 0 in coordinate 0 and coordinate 1. So that's the result here. And we can print that result, system out, print line. The result is plus result 1. And now let's do the same for result 2. So that's result 2. Of course, it's coordinate 2, result 2. I mean, of course, this one is not needed here because the computer player is not reading what's in the console. It's just for us testing this program at this stage. So right now, I'm just going to cheat and take a peek at the enemy's board, which is here. So it looks like at row 0, column 14, there is a ship. 0, 0, there is no ship. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do 0, 0. And 0, 0, the result is miss, right? Now AI is shooting on the other player at 8, 1, and the result is also a miss. This is my board, there is nothing at 8, 1. So column, 8 is the row and the column is 1, okay. Now I know for a fact here that there is a ship at column 14, row 0. So what I'm going to do 14, 0. And the result is X. The result is a hit. So that's that. What is that communicating to me? So this piece of information, we need to do two things. We need to update that player's enemies board to say that, well, so it's a hit or a miss. And we also need to update players 2 on board to indicate only when it's a hit that, well, look, this ship is now hit, right? So this is like in the game when that player puts like a red piece on top of that ship. So two things here. The first one is actually pretty straightforward. It's in receive method. The moment it's a hit, you need to update on boards cell here. So if we go to the class board, there's no method set cell, but I can create such a method here. It's pretty similar to check cell, except that it's set cell. So I can basically set cell here. It's like a setter method in a way. Row, column, and char new value or value. Of course, I can't check for errors, but this particular method I'm not going to connect it to input coming from user or random. So I'm pretty much guaranteed that these are valid inputs. So what simply I'm going to do is to set cells at row column to be that value. So going back to player, when there is a hit on my own board, I should indicate that set cell row column value, and the value is hit. Of course, if it's a miss, in this particular game, the player does not indicate this piece of information. I mean, it can be valuable if you're playing the game to see where the player is kind of joking around or targeting. Anyhow, the targeting is random, so there's no point in here. But you have to ensure that the hit information is stored, because once all of those ships are hit, when the game is over, right? So at some point this piece of information needs to be used to signal that the game's over. So let's go back to game here, and so calling the method receive will take care of setting up player 2 here on board. But then you also need to do this in the player 1 enemies board to indicate whether it's a hit or a miss. So what we can do here in player, we can create a method to make that update, like update enemies board. Let's ensure we don't have such a method first. It doesn't seem we have one. So we can create such a method. We can create a method called update enemies enemies board, and at row column, and then value. What this will basically do, it will call the method set cell on enemies board. So in game, once we know the results, of course we can print it. But what we can do here, we can say, okay, why don't you update your own enemies board? So enemies board is the player's representation or incomplete knowledge of the enemies board. So this is what I'm going to do to call the method update enemies board on coordinate 0, coordinate 1, 1, and of course the value here is result 1. So this basically will take this piece of information and put it here. Now we can do the same here, same idea. We can take player 1 receiving this information, so that's the result, and then player 1 should receive this shot here, so game.player1.receive coordinate 2, 0, coordinate 2, 1. And well, we already done it here, so it's not needed. It needs to update the enemy's board, but this is player 2, and this is coordinate 2, 0, coordinate 2, 1, and then result 2. Okay. Now what we can do at this point, we can also make player 1 prints its own board, kind of to mimic the game, right, and see what's going on. So I can do player 1 print on board. Alright, so of course this is the deliverable one. 2 boards are printed. I'm just noting down here a cell that has a ship, which is row 0, column 10, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. So 0, 10 or 10, 0. And now this is the game logic here started. It prints my own board here and prints the enemy's board. So I'm going to go with a miss here. And it's saying the result is a miss. The other player is targeting me, and the result is also a miss, because I don't have a 0, 4. And this is the board. My board is still intact, but now notice that the enemy's board now has this O, because this is a miss. Now this is nice, because if I try to target 0, 0 again, I shouldn't do that, because it should be clear that it's a miss. But if I do that, the method should check and give me back that because of the if statement in the method shoot, it will insist on getting something which is an open C. So this one, it insists on them being open C. So if I do 0, 0, it shouldn't take that. It will refuse this input. So let's target 0, 14. So it's 14, 0 since we're doing columns row. And let's take a look at the results. It's saying that it's a miss. Okay, so maybe I missed. Oh, it's not 0, 14, it's 0, 10. So I targeted the last column in the first row. And the computer player also was a miss. So right now, if you take a look at my board, there are 2 misses here. And of course, they hasn't managed to hit any of my ships yet. So I'm going to do 10, 0, and this is a hit. So let's take a look. Oops. 0, it's miss in this case, so maybe I counted these columns. Let's go back to the really beginning of the game. So this is my own board, and this is computer player board. Okay, so I kind of mixed up the 2 boards. Alright, so it looks like there's a ship in column 0 and row 9. Is it 9? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this one should be a hit. So 0, 8. And we got a hit here. AI, computer player, still did not hit any of my ships. What's important here is to note that we got the X here. So this is an indication that we have made a hit at this point. All right, and then the game continues here. So let's see. Let's target this one. It seems that they've got a ship on column 14, 9, 14, 9, I'd say, right? So 14, 9. And this is the second hit. Now it's still not being able to target my ships because it's doing all of these randomly, so it probably will take much more time since I'm peeking on their board to make that hit happen. Now, of course, if you've got more ships, it should be much more frequent, right? So here we will be playing this game for a while until the AI hits one of our ships. Now what we can do here, if you just want to test the fact that the AI is hitting the ships, we can make more ships since like still there are individual cells. Just because I want to test this one, I'm going to go to 70 instead of 7 in Think and Compute. The basic idea is that I want the board to be full of ships so that I have no issues hitting, or they have no issues hitting mine, right? So it's like much higher chance. So let me try to shoot 0, 0. It's a miss. And AI got a hit actually here. So if I look at my own board here at 9, 0, I should see a hit at this point. So it's column 9, row 0, and column 9, row 0, which doesn't show up here. So something is wrong. So we have to check that method in player that updates that, because AI here managed to shoot and got a hit. Let's go to game here, coordinate, and the result 2 was a hit. And then we want to update players 2. Okay, so here is the problem. It's a copy and paste mistake. It's basically player 1 should receive this shot here, not player 2. Right? Because the AI is making a choice, and I should receive that shot, not player 2. So it's player 1 that receives. Player 2 shoots, player 1 receives, and vice versa. So again, I could have just called it a day, but testing thoroughly is important, even when you're pretty sure that you've done the right thing. So with that, I think we should do one more pass here. See what's going on. So I'm going to target 0, 0. And see if AI got a miss too. Okay, let's target 4, 4. And oops, I got hit. Let's see what happened. Looks like AI is shooting on me. And it was an X at 912. And this is my ship, which is now sunk, right? It's hit. So he got this ship. So now I'm kind of pretty guaranteed it's working both ways. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to those small changes, the 70, of course it's not 70, it's 7. 7 chips. And I'm also going to the to-do I put to myself in player, which is setting up pieces. So I'm looking for this to-do that I need to, well, of course there are many to-dos here because it's incomplete, but there's this to-do to remove this, revert it back to think after testing. So if you go back to the old formula, now the human player will enter pieces, business as usual, right? So 0, and so on and so forth. What's one more? Right, and this is the game, and the board is printing. We got a miss here. And let's shoot on the other player. And now the game proceeds. Let's take a look at the AI player. So the first miss is basically I was keeping entering coordinate, and 3-3 was actually not the last chip, but was the first shot. So that's the first miss. But let's take a peek at the enemy's board here, which is here. They've got one ship at column 0, row 2, so I'm going to do 0, 2. And yes, it's a hit. I can keep doing this. This one we tried, right? So that's why it's insisting on another one. And it will keep printing my board, which is still intact, and the enemy's board. Okay. So this is pretty much an almost complete implementation of the game loop. We broke this kind of shooting logic to two methods. One of them is shoot, the other one is receive. Shoot will basically probe the player to make a choice about the target coordinates, and receive will communicate these target coordinates to the other player and get the result, whether it's a hit or a miss. And then this result will need to use to update the player's enemy's board, the knowledge of the enemy's board. So the two players have to go through this process. Now finally, and I'm going to leave this one for you, we need to decide when the game has to end, because this one is an infinite loop. And of course the game ends when all of the ships of one player are sunk. So how do we know that? Well, the player can check its own board and basically gives back this result whether there is more ships or all of the ships have sunk, right? So you can do that at the end of the loop, check if player 1 has X more ships or player 2 has more ships, and when this is false, you want to break the loop and report the result of the game. And of course, there is a potential of a draw if the two players sinks each other's ship at the same last iteration in the loop. So think about doing this. You'll need to implement probably some other methods in the class player to return the number of remaining ships. Once this number is 0, you need to break this loop at some point, but you also need to give the other player one last chance to target the first player. And outside of this loop, you want to report the results. Alright, I hope this is useful to complete the project. Good luck.